Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. This is a special program in that we are recording today on the 9th of March of 2015 for a program that will be shown sometime near 2064 when Wadsworth celebrates its 250th anniversary. We have two special guests today, and these are the guests who actually worked very, very closely with the Historical Society in making our presentations of the historical people from Wadsworth and historical events from Wadsworth. On my left is John Weedy, and I'm going to spell that because we spell all of the names so that people will be able to write them appropriately, even 50 years from now. And it's W-I-E-D-E-Y.
You are correct.
Yes, John Weedy. And John is not only a member of the Historical Society, but he's also the curator of the historical house, the Johnson House as we call it. And he'll be telling us more about that. And right next to him is his wife, Frances Weedy, W-E-I-D-E-Y, and his F-R-A-N-C-E-S.
W-I-E.
What did I say?
W-E-I.
Oh, I'll correct that. W-I-E-D-E-Y.
That's correct.
And Frances is spelled F-R-A-N-C-E-S, right?
Yes, correct.
We do have some female Franceses that spell it with the I-S, so we want to make sure that the names are spelled correctly. So John, how about telling us a little bit about John Weedy? Now, I see some grayish hair there, so you probably are not a youngster. Not a youngster, so you've been around for a little while. Tell us about your relationship to Wadsworth and some of the family members who are still here that were here probably 150 years ago.
Yes. Well, to start off with, I am from Akron. I'm a native of Akron. And the reason being is that my grandfather, who was a native of Wadsworth, couldn't get any employment during the Depression of 1898.
94, 98. Mm-hmm.
And so consequently, he moved into Akron.
And who was your grandfather?
My grandfather was John Philip Nolf.
N-O-L-F.
N-O-L-F, right.
And that name is one of the old names in Wadsworth.
Yes. My great-grandfather came to Wadsworth around 1840 and stayed his whole time. My grandfather then, of course, was born in Wadsworth, but then moved into Akron. And I could never figure out, as a young child, why my grandparents moved into Akron. Because when we came out to Wadsworth, it was such a wonderful place to visit. And I enjoyed coming out here probably once a month. And my grandfather, they would drive him around town and he would say, well, this is where this happened and this is where that happened. He was born on a farm down in River Styx, and I can remember we would drive by the area down there and he would say, yeah, the farm was back in there, but they've torn the house down. So anyway, that was my connection to Wadsworth. Then when I married Frances, I said, when we're ready to buy a house, I know of a neat place we want to move, and that's out to Wadsworth. And she agreed with me 100%. And a house of a relative went up for sale, and I said to Frances, I'm going to talk to the attorney, who was Lou Wilson, and see if we can't buy that house. So we did. We bought the house. And then Lou moved in on 142 Highland Avenue and lived there for 43 years.
And who was the relative who owned it before then?
Okay, the house was built by Ed Nolf, who was one of the jewelers who was downtown in the little narrow building where the gold store is today.
Well, we'll have to identify it geographically. It's probably...
It's 120.
120, but let's say about 100 feet south of the...
High Street.
High Street.
It's on High Street, yes.
No,
it's
on Main Street.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, on
yes.
Main Street. But it's about 100 feet south of College Street, true, on the west side of the road. And that little, that used to be an alley, but they put a front and a back on it and made it a store. And then many years later, it was a shoe store, shoe repair store.
At first, it was a liquor store.
Right.
And then when the liquor store moved out, the Knopf brothers took it over and opened up their jewelry store.
It's
there.
only 9 feet wide.
That's right.
And about probably about 40 feet long, something like that.
That's correct.
And his brother was
All Knopf.
Oliver Knopf, and very famous people in Wadsworth for many, many years.
They were well known.
Well known. They bought instruments for students, and
That was All Knopf,
that
yes.
was All Knopf,
He
that's
was
right.
very active in.
And there's still one of the Knopf girls living, and that's Lois, is it not?
Yes, that's correct.
And she would be 87 years old now. She would be. She was born 1927.
Yeah, and I think they live up in Wisconsin, if I'm not
I believe that's
mistaken.
correct. Yeah,
Yes.
she was a very, very bright girl. Very bright girl. I knew her quite well. She was one of my brother's classmates.
Runs in the family.
It runs in the family. What do you have to say about that, Francis? Does it run in the family?
Well, I'd have to say agree with him.
I
of
have
course,
to agree.
Yes,
Well, actually,
yes.
we're going to come back to you because you have a lot more to tell us in terms of your own life. Like you're an engineer at Goodrich.
Goodyear.
Goodyear, and all of those other kinds of things. But let's hear about Francis now for a couple seconds.
Well, Francis has been a Wadsworth native since 1970.
Since
when
1970.
when we moved to Wadsworth. But prior to that, I was born in Scotland.
Where in Scotland?
Dundee, Scotland, which is
Dundee?
northeast of Edinburgh, on the North Sea, a cold and windy place.
Just like Wadsworth in the
Just
wintertime.
like Wadsworth, yes. No, but in 1959, I had the opportunity to come over and spend some time in the United States on an exchange with a minister and his family who were in New Jersey, Cranberry, New Jersey. And they were exchanging with a minister from Edinburgh. And I came over, and the understanding was I would come for 18 months. Well, when it was time to come home, I extended it a little bit, and then I went back, but I had a return ticket. I enjoyed it over here very much. And my parents reluctantly said, well, okay. So I came over here, and then I went to college over here.
Where?
I went to the University of Akron.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where I met John. I met John while I was in Akron.
Was John at the university as well?
Well, he was at the university, but I actually met him at the dentist's office. I was I was working for a dentist part-time while I went up to Akron.
Which dentist?
Dr. William Ream. And
I knew him. Mm-hmm.
he was a fine man. And I met John there, and we were married in Akron, and then we, as John said, we moved out to 142 Highland, where we lived for 43 years. And we've now moved, and we live at Briarthorn. So,
Tell us what Briarthorn is.
well, Briarthorn's a condominium complex on 261 Akron Road, and it's freestanding condominium, so a lot of retired people live there.
And what did you major in at the University of Akron?
Education.
And what did you do after you got your degree?
When I got my degree, I taught in Akron for a couple of years at
Where?
Leggett School.
Leggett School, which is an inner city school.
Right, it was inner city school.
It's no longer there.
Right, torn down.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1970, when we moved out here, we had our first child, a son, John Graham, and I didn't teach for a few years, but when I was ready to come back to teaching, we also had a daughter a couple of years later, Elizabeth.
And her Elizabeth what?
Elizabeth Martha.
Martin?
Martha.
Elizabeth Martha. And her married name?
Her married name is Gilbert.
Gilbert.
She's a nurse down in Columbus. Our son is a computer engineer in Boston. And then I went, when they were in kindergarten, basically, I went back to teaching at, I taught at Overlook, had a year at Lincoln, and then settled in at Isham School for the remainder of my...
How many years did you teach in Wadsworth?
I taught 27 years in Wadsworth.
And when did you get your degree at the University of Akron?
Oh,
1970.
70.
1970.
Yes, just
Did you
before
walk across the stage?
Did I? Yes, I walked across the stage.
I read your name.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
I didn't
Yes,
remember
you
that.
did.
Yes,
Yes.
I was at the University of Akron from, well, I started reading the names about 1967,
Okay.
and I read them for 20 years. And one of the colleges, we would alternate, two of us would read the names, and we would alternate. And I always read the College of Education. Since I had been at the College of Education, I was assistant dean there at the time.
Well,
As a matter
thank
of
you.
fact, you probably were, I was probably assistant dean when you graduated.
Probably.
From
I know you're
68
up there.
to 72, I was
Yes.
assistant dean
Yes.
of education. Well, we knew you before you got there,
Right.
before we met here.
Right.
And Caesar, I need to comment that when you were reading the names, you pronounced ours correctly.
I'm positive I did because we had to practice them.
Oh,
And one of the problems we had so many people from India, and the names were miles long, and we had to get them right because they were extremely sensitive about the way their names were pronounced. Extremely sensitive, more so than any American student. That's such an interesting story about coming all the way from Scotland. And Dundee, we hear about Dundee all the time. Is it as picturesque as we think that it is?
yes.
Well, Scotland's pretty picturesque.
It is.
as a
I love
whole.
Scotland.
Yes, yes, very much so.
The people there were much more friendly, I thought, than in England. But that has borne well from our relationship with you because you're extremely friendly as well. Now, we're going to come back to this, but in the meantime, we have to do what our business is today, and that is to talk about the Bicentennial and your function in it. As a matter of fact, I believe, John, you had well, if not the first, yes, it was the first. You had the very first program because I think that it preceded the opening night or the opening day, which they
Yes.
called first night.
Yes.
First night, didn't it?
Yes.
What was the first day? It was March 9th or something?
March the 8th.
March 8th. March 8th, which is, today is what?
Oh, it's almost a year ago.
Oh, tomorrow,
It's the
today is
ninth. Today's the 9th.
the 9th, so a year ago yesterday.
Yeah.
And then on the 15th, we had the opening night, or the very
Yes.
first big function. So tell us about what you did and how you had to do it, and how you selected the people to portray the history of Wadsworth.
Well, I started giving it a lot of thought, and I thought to myself, I need to get people who know the community well and who could stand up and talk about it. And it just happens that our first speaker was Caesar Carino.
Yes, it was.
And Caesar put on an excellent presentation on the history of the names of streets in Wadsworth.
Believe it or not, there are 115 streets in Wadsworth that were named after people or events.
And not only that, but we had our best attendance for that meeting. We had over 100 people. And the future meetings, we were running somewhere between 50 and 75.
And I thought that they were all well attended because
They were.
different types of programs appeal to different kinds of people. And I would imagine that a lot of the people who came for the names of the streets were probably relatives of some of the people.
Yes, they were.
And they wanted to hear about the.
Oh, sure.
Would you like to hear about some of the other programs?
Every one of them, yep.
Okay. The second program was put on by a lady from Medina. Her name is Kim Carlson. She grew up, lived here in Wadsworth, but her expertise is genealogy. And she called me one day. I had never met her. And she said, you know, I'm doing a genealogy study on the Knopf family.
Which, of course, is your family.
Which is my family. And she said,
Your mother was a Knopf, right?
yes, she was.
What was her first name?
Martha.
Martha. That's where the Martha came from your
That's
daughter.
Right.
And before we go any farther, when was Martha born?
1903.
1903. And do you remember the date?
Yeah. May the 3rd.
May 3rd, 1903. Okay.
You always know your mother's birthday.
Most people do.
I kind of forget Francis's every once in a while, but
Not very often, though.
Not very
no, not very often.
No.
And so I said, boy, I'd love to talk to you. Well, she came and called at our house and sat down, and for the next 2 or maybe even 3 hours, she told me more about the Knoll family than I had known. But she was lucky in that she found records that were correct, and so she put together a genealogy of the Knoll family, even to the farm they lived on River Styx. Then they moved into town when my grandfather retired to a house on Broad Street.
Which house, do you remember?
I can point to it. I don't know. It's on the hill just before you get to the high school.
Before you get to the high school?
Yes.
On the hill, okay. I'm trying to think of the number would be in the 600s, and
I think that's right.
no, I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. The 600s.
Because high school's 600.
But then when he fully retired, he moved to a house on Mill Street. And both of those houses are still standing and in nice repair, so that when I take our kids by there, I say, now, your great-grandfather lived in that house. And
Do you know which house it was?
yes, it was the house on Mill Street right at the end of Wautroosa.
If you come
Oh,
out
the
of
great big
Wadsworth-
house on the northwest
Well,
corner?
it's not a
It's
real
on
big
Mill.
one.
No, it's
Northwest?
across the street.
No, it's on the
South side.
It's on the match side of the street.
Oh, on the other side of the street.
Yeah,
okay.
it's on that would be the
south
south
side.
side.
South side, right.
And the house pretty much is the way it was when my grandparents lived there. Excuse me.
Right. Now, why would this lady be doing the Knoll genealogy?
She was hired by the
Canton Museum of
Canton
Art.
Museum of Art because they got a hold of some records and asked this woman to develop some of the stories.
Wasn't it maybe important to say, she was doing research on an artist by the name of Ferdinand Brader.
This is what I wanted you to talk
Yes.
about.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I got ahead of my story.
Trying to lead you into that story.
Yeah. Ferdinand Brader came to Wadsworth by following the railroad track.
Which was where?
Well, it was was the Erie track, or today, I guess it's owned by the
CSX.
CSX.
However, we have to identify it geographically because 50 years from now it may not be there.
Oh, that's right.
About a mile south of the square, and it runs east and west, and it goes through Wadsworth, and then goes down through Rittman, and to the east it goes through Barberton.
Right.
Okay.
And into Akron.
And into Akron. It
Right.
goes all the way to New York, to Chicago, actually.
At one time, yes, yes. So anyway, that was the railroad track that brought Mr. Brader into town. But Mr. Brader was an artist, and as he came into town, excuse me, he would note the farms and so forth, and then would draw a picture of them, and then go up and talk to the owners, and hopefully could sell the picture. I'm very sorry.
Not a problem. We have, all of us have had colds. This is a horrible winter, and we have, unfortunately, we have a deadline by March 15th. All of these programs have to be done. So whether we cough or whether we sneeze or whatever, we're going through with it.
We're going to finish.
Right.
Let me just take it for a minute so you can rest your voice.
Yeah.
Ferdinand Brader, as John was saying, was coming through town and coming by the railroad track, and as he saw the farms, he would draw the pictures. But the neat thing about it was, at the bottom of the picture, he would put the name of the farmer. And one of the farms, so we have the names of the different people, and of course one of them was John's family, the Knolf family,
Mm-hmm.
and it was William Knolf, John,
Yes.
and his wife, Mary.
Yes.
And his wife, Mary. name escapes me for a moment.
Catherine.
Catherine, William and Catherine Knopf, and then it has a date, and there's the farm, a rendition of the farm. But this Kim Carlson, in her research, was able to take the names off the pictures, and then she would do extensive research on each of the families. And there were maybe 8 families in Wadsworth.
At least she had
Right.
she made presentations
At
for
the
about 8 people.
presentation. So this was how, you know, we knew it was the Knopf family.
Invaluable.
And well written, and she left. And down at the Historic Museum right now at 161 High Street, we have copies of everything she said. She made up folders for each family, so the families could come in and see them there and get the information. And then there was an exhibit at the Kent Museum of Art.
See, by the time the 2064 rolls around, your great-grandfather, your grandfather,
And his great-grandfather.
your
My
great-grandfather
great-grandfather.
will have been here for 125 years or so.
Yeah.
So the people in 2064 will want to refer to that, and we hope that the Johnson House and the museum will still be there.
I hope.
But
yes.
if it isn't, somebody is going to be smart enough to put all of these things on a computer somewhere so that we'll be able to preserve that. So if you're looking for information from all of these farmer people who were portrayed by the pictures that the artist chose to draw, that will give you a good history of Wadsworth long before any of our books were written.
And it not only tells you the picture itself, you know, many of the houses are no longer there or have been adapted or porches taken off, but then he liked trains, and he liked to depict, most of the pictures have a little train running across.
Oh, really?
And this Kim Carlson said she thought it was depicting where the coal mines were,
It's entirely
or the coal
possible.
shafts, because they're small trains, but you can see the coal piled up on top of the trains, which is really, you know, interesting.
Well, actually, the coal mines actually grew up around by coincidence, the coal mines grew up around the railroad in Silver Creek particularly. We need to get all of your people identified there, John, and then we go back and dissect them a little bit. Who was your third one? Your third
person here.
presenter?
Oh,
Roger.
I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about my relatives.
Oh, well. We can have a whole program on your relatives.
The third presentation was our past editor of the Wadsworth newspaper, Charlie Ackerman. And he came in and talked about basically early Wadsworth as he remembered it.
Now, Charlie Ackerman, tell us a little bit about Charlie Ackerman.
Well, he was the editor of the newspaper. I believe he took over from Nellie Harder.
No, not really.
No.
John Miller.
That was much later. Nellie Harder was actually, well, to give you just a little bit of
29.
background, Nellie Harder was here in the teens and 20s and 30s and part of the 40s, very, very little in the 40s.
Yeah.
And then John Miller took over.
Right.
And then after John Miller, then we had a couple other people, but
Charlie.
you just said his name.
Charlie Ackerman.
Charlie Ackerman. You have to forgive us. We're all up in the years. I'm 84, and you're what, 22 or 23? At least that. 21. Charlie Ackerman then became the editor when the paper actually no longer was in Wadsworth, but moved to Medina, Brunswick, and so forth, and he became the editor there. But he knows Wadsworth backwards and forwards because he worked for the News Banner here in Wadsworth, as well as for, I'm not sure that he worked for the Banner Press. I think he'd be too young to work for the Banner Press.
Yes, I believe you're right. Our next speaker was June 14th, and that was Roger Havens, who is now the principal at Franklin School. And he gave a talk on the Wadsworth schools. And this is an item that, of course, he's very interested in, and has done a lot of research and could tell us where a lot of the earlier buildings were. And it's amazing, some of them are still standing.
Well, one of the things that causes us to identify things geographically is the fact that people will say, well, it's right where Isham School is. Well, Isham School is no longer there. Or Valley View School, no longer there. Overlook School, no longer there. Lincoln School, no longer there. Franklin School, no longer there. So and that happened within 25 years. When we had our 175th anniversary, all of those schools were extant. Not one, well, the only one that's extant right now is the Central School, which is now called the Central Intermediate School, but at one time was the high school, the junior high school, the elementary school, it was everything at one time. When I went to school there, and I graduated in 1948, my locker was right opposite the second grade classroom. And we had the entire gamut of students from kindergarten all the way through seniors in high school in one building. And all of them put together do not constitute the number of people who graduate from the city of Wadsworth today. That's all 12 grades did not equal the number of people who graduate from Wadsworth today.
Roger was good about telling us about the 10 or maybe 9, because one consolidated one-room schoolhouses that were spread throughout the township.
We had 11.
11, and then there was a consolidation.
The consolidation brought it down to 10.
Right, and so he was good about telling us about the one-room school system, and then as it moved into the Wadsworth City Schools.
Right, and then in 1923 we had all of the little outlying schools, one-room schools that went into the Wadsworth Centralized School, which was where the Mennonite College was, approximately a mile west of the square on the north side of the road, where the present Isham School is, but it's in the back of where it was before it was torn down a couple of years ago. What else do we have here coming up from the fifth one?
Okay, then on June the 14th, or excuse me, July the 12th, we had a gentleman by the name of Joe Meyer, who is...
Let's spell Meyer in this case.
M-A-Y-E-R.
M-A-Y-E-R, Meyer.
And his father was the principal. At
At Isham School.
At Isham School.
Yes.
Where Francis taught. Was he principal there?
No, he was prior to me. By the time I was teaching, Joe Meyer's father, George, was the treasurer. He went on to become the treasurer.
Well, he retired from the academics end of it, and then became the treasurer of the school. He's a mathematician by design.
Right.
And a good card player.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he was a member of our Wadsworth Cribbage Club.
Oh, really?
Yes, he was, and a delightful person. Well, anyway, Joe Meyer came in and talked about the Erie Railroad in Wadsworth.
Let's tell us about what the Erie Railroad was or is, because it no longer exists.
Well, that was the railroad track that we talked about earlier. And the Erie Railroad was well known in Wadsworth because that's the train that took all the soldier boys away and brought them back.
Most of them were taken away, few brought back.
Yes, that's very unfortunate. That's the way it happened. But anyway, he had a huge collection of photographs of the Wadsworth Railroad system, including the coal dumps that were up.
The Tipples.
The Tipples, right.
Silver Creek.
Right in front of our house.
Oh, yeah, that's probably was with where you grew up.
Where I grew up, right in front of our house. Well, I mean, it was maybe 1,000 feet south of our house, but, well, not quite 1,000, about 500 feet south of our house, but we could see it from our house. And I was scared to death of that Tipple. I don't know why, because it looked so desolate. It was all the boards were unpainted, and it was all by itself, and it was abandoned, and oh, it was just horrible.
Well, I can understand what you're saying, because I see pictures of those things, And then to imagine that they drove a locomotive up a ramp on top of one of those things to unload coal.
Made out of wood.
Yeah, and it's amazing that some of them didn't collapse, but they didn't. Then on our next speaker was August the 9th, and this was a delightful speaker. It was our ex-fire chief, Ralph Copley, came in and did a presentation on his fine collection of Wadsworth postcards.
And he had about 300 of them? He
If
didn't
not-
show that many, but he has
if
about
not
300.
more, if not more. I would say he probably has maybe close to 500, but
Altogether?
yes. But he put on that presentation, and for a lot of us, we saw postcards that we've never seen before.
The postcards were not only the ones that you could buy in a store, but the ones that people sent from one place to another, to one person or another, and they had writing on the back of them. So we got a little bit of the history, or flavor of the history of those people way back in the 1902, 3, 4, 1895, and so forth. And I hope that the people in 2064 will avail themselves of Ralph's book. He has it in the book form now. And do we have it in the historical house?
We
Has
don't
it been
have one.
published?
Pardon me?
Has it been published?
I'm not positive that it's been published yet, but it's going to be published.
I don't think it has, but it's going. Yes, I think it's coming up.
But the people in 2064 need to get a hold of that, because it gives a wonderful history of Wadsworth in pictures. Now, some of the pictures are doctored up, but but they're close enough so they can see where the stores were, because they have the fronts on them and the names on them and things like that. There are so many things that you can get from those postcards.
And it's such a history of a bygone era, because here we have people sending postcards, for just trifling matters, things we would pick up the phone and talk to people about when they're going to arrive back home from a visit, or they're visiting a relative close by.
Or they got home safely.
Right, they got home, and could they meet, were they coming over for dinner in a couple of days? It was just a way of, communication that was necessary.
Do they still have postcards?
Oh yes.
At resorts, I don't know if you could buy them in town.
We have never purchased, I can't remember receiving a postcard at our house for years and years and years. So I suspect that they probably have gone out of this year.
Probably.
Well, either that or they got pitched. Unfortunately, not everyone saved their postcards.
I'm talking about the little penny postcards we used to have. At one time they're called penny postcards. Now they're, how much are they? About 35 cents?
Actually, I'm going to take that back. Carolyn's Cupboard sells present-day postcards.
Now you'll have to tell us about Carolyn's Cupboards, where it is.
Carolyn's Cupboard is on Main Street. It is south of the square.
About
on the
300 feet.
Where T. Abrams grocery store was.
Which of course means nothing.
It's on the
it's
west
adjacent
side.
to the may
Adjacent to the alley, which may not be there in 2064.
Right.
Probably not.
The west side.
On the west side of the road,
Yes.
about 300 feet south on the west side of the road.
Yes.
And she sells what?
She sells, staples, and Wadsworth items.
Wadsworth items, that's the
And
thing.
yes, Wadsworth items. And as I say, she sells some postcards too.
And some candy and things
Candy,
like that.
tea.
But it's a kind of a neat place to go.
Right,
And
right.
of course, Carolyn herself is such a delightful person anyway. You just want to go in there to talk to her. She's such very delightful.
On September the 13th, we were fortunate that we had one of the local merchants come in and talk about the history of his store, which was started by his grandfather, and that's Bixler's Electric. Paul Bixler, who was the grandson of the founder of that business.
Wesley Bixler was the grandfather.
Was the grandfather, right. And he gave a delightful talk on the Bixler Company and brought in photographs that were really, everyone enjoyed that.
As I remember, John, he brought in also some artifacts, the old-fashioned washing machines and the old-fashioned refrigerators and things like that. And I don't know how he got them into the. We had all of these programs in City Hall, in the council chambers of City Hall, and he brought those in, and it was really interesting, I thought, just to revisit those. I remember them because refrigerators and things like that were not necessarily invented too terribly long before. Well, as a matter of fact, before I was born, just maybe a year or so before I was born.
And the Bixler store is an interesting store because it's been in several locations.
Yes, it has.
It's been down on College Street, just around the corner from Watusa, between Watusa and Pardee.
That's right.
Yes.
It's about 300 feet from the square.
And at
That's
this
where Wesley Bixler had his first one.
First,
Right.
and the Bixler name is up at the
It's
top
on the
of the
top
top
of
building.
the
That's
building.
right, yeah.
And then it was down on Main Street, on the east side of Main Street, in front of Central School.
Right. There was a house there at one time,
Right.
and a church there, and the house was an apartment dwelling for
Right.
for a while. Then they
And then its current location is on High Street, the first block in the Myers, well, it was the Myers block at one time.
Yeah.
Couple of 100 yards from
No,
the
not-
square.
I would say maybe 200 feet.
200 feet.
200
okay,
feet on the west side of the road.
On the west side of the road. And down at the historic house, we have an interesting picture, and it shows Wesley Bixler, the founder of the store, and his wife Mabel, who's sitting. Wesley is on his motorcycle. Mabel is sitting in the sidecar, and they went on their honeymoon in 1912
To Niagara Falls.
up to Niagara Falls. There's a backdrop. It's a stage picture, but it is his motorcycle, and Mabel sitting valiantly in the sidecar.
But they did drive that motorcycle to Niagara Falls.
Which was, what, 300 miles from here?
Maybe even just a little bit more in those days, because the interstates weren't.
No, there were no interstates.
No. And I know that Wes Sr. used to talk about that trip. And I met them back in the 50s. They went to the same antique shop that I did.
Oh, I see.
And they were there every Saturday afternoon, and I was usually there about the same time. But many times he talked about the motorcycle drive to Niagara Falls.
Now, the person who gave the program, who was Paul Bixler,
Paul.
his father was Eldon Bixler,
Eldon.
E-L-D-O-N, whom we all called, he was in school with us, we all called him Beef Bixler. Matter of fact, I've never called him Eldon in my life. And wonderful person, a stocky man. And his brothers he had 3 other brothers, and they were of normal size, and actually Eldon was of normal size, but he was just stocky. And that's why, I suspect that's why we called him Beef. We called him Beef Bixler. All of the Bixler boys are dead now. That is, the first generation, Wesley's generation is dead, and his sons are all dead. And now the grandsons are the only ones who are keeping the store alive, and they do a lot of electrical work.
Oh, yeah.
And they've been around for 100 years or more.
Exactly 100 years, yes.
Exactly 100 years.
So that was pretty much our.
Well, we had a couple more.
Wait, you had Bob Tubasing.
Oh, well.
How could you forget Bob?
How could you forget? We were ready to close up shop because we didn't have a speaker lined up for October the 11th. Until finally somebody said, why don't you give Bob Tubasing a call? And Bob Tubasing's father owned I guess it was a dry goods
Dry
store.
goods store, right. Herb Tubasing. Again, we never called him Herbert. It was always Herb.
Yeah.
On the center of about 100 feet south of the square, on the east side of the road, on the east side of the street, as I should say. I live in the country, so it's a road in the country. On the east side of the street. And it had dry goods, bolts of cloth, and things like that.
So anyway, We finally talked Bob Tubesing into coming and talking about their business in Wadsworth and the early days of Wadsworth. And Bob showed up. He was the youngest looking, I believe he was 97.
No, he was born in 1921.
Or 21,
No,
okay.
So he was, at the time that he came here, he was 93 years old.
Okay, 93, yeah, okay. But anyway, his mind was good and sharp, and was really, we enjoyed having him as a speaker.
Well, Bob actually, and I'm sure he would not mind my saying this because everyone knows about it. I knew Bob very, very well. And he was the person you would least expect when he was a young kid to become a famous person. And he did become a famous person because he was an artist for National Geographic. He does absolutely beautiful pictures. I mean, just really, really, really talented. But he was just an ornery, lovable, ornery kid when he was growing up. They tell the one story, and I would like to tell this story because I think that it'd be historically significant, 50 years from now. We had the library here in Wadsworth, and the library was very, very small. It was an old house. Ella Everhard donated the house to the library. And in the library, which is about the size of a living room and a dining room put together, we had the books. And behind, where the kitchen would have been, was a place where they had Indian artifacts. Well, one day, Bob, he was 17 years old at the time, 16 years old at the time, he and two of his friends walked into the library and put on the most beautiful face about wanting to learn about what's in those books and so forth. So they walked around, and pretty soon they went to the librarian and asked if they could go back to the Indian room. You had to have permission to go back to the Indian room, and in those days the two librarians ruled with an iron fist. You did not go to the Indian room unless they let you. And they said, what do you want to see at the Indian room? Well, we want to see some of the things we're going to have, we're going to make a report on them when school starts. Okay, so they went back there. They had no intention of seeing the Indian stuff. They went and they opened one of the windows, the lock of one of the windows. That night they came back, they crawled inside the window and took out one of the skulls. One of the skulls was in the showcase, and took it over to the corner of Maple and Lyman. And there was a little old lady there who was living by herself, and she was always digging in her flowers, and they buried this underneath the ground. And the next day, this little old lady came out, and she started chipping with her hoe little by little. She could hear tap, 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 tap. And she pulled the dirt away, and she saw something there, didn't know what it was, and tap, tap, tap some more. And she lifted this thing up as a skull. Well, scared her to death. And she ran down to Tommy Lucas, who was the marshal at that time. And Tommy Lucas said, give me a minute. And he called Herb Tubesing, said, where's Bob? And Herb said, he's at home. Said, tell him to come down to the store. I want to talk to him. So Herb called his son, and he said, Bob, you're going to hang before you're 17. And he went down there, and of course, he admitted to it and so forth. But Bob actually turned out to be a very responsible, highly respected artist, so much so that he drew the pictures for National Geographic. And let me tell you, that's really something. So that came from Wadsworth.
Well, we were very fortunate in that his pictures that he drew of Wadsworth, he brought us copies and presented them to the Historical Society. Mm-hmm. So we do have Bob's pictures of Wadsworth, and really they're outstanding.
They are. A camera could not have done a better job. We promised we were going to go back to a little bit of your lives here, and I think it'd be very interesting for you to tell us a little bit about your work experience, John, because it had some significance in this area, which may not have a significance in 2064 because maybe they won't have rubber anymore. But you were involved with the rubber industry.
Right,
Tell us a little
with
bit about
Goodyear
that.
Tire.
Goodyear Tire.
And I spent most of my career, well, my first year at Goodyear was on what they called the squadron.
Now tell us about the squadron. That's something extremely important for historical
Okay,
evidence.
that was for a young person when they hired into Goodyear. They could be put on the squad, and they would take and send you on factory assignments or office assignments all over the company, wherever they needed an extra hand. And so I started off on the squad.
What year was that, John?
That was in I have to stop and think a minute. That was
64?
59.
59. Okay.
1959. And I had assignments. They were mostly office assignments, and that in the traffic department. And it was very interesting because that's a part of business today that you don't really see a lot of.
What is the traffic department anyway?
Their job was for shipping materials and both inbound and exbound.
All over the world.
All over the world. And that was a lot of fun. I got to meet a lot of people. And so that's where I started off. And from there, I went and got a job at Goodyear in the research department, and working on a project that where they were coming up with a new experimental rubber.
Which was what?
Which was...
What was the name of the experimental rubber?
Oh, I wish you wouldn't have asked me, Caesar. I forget.
Which has already become passed.
Oh, it's come and gone, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know that when I worked on that project, everything was secret. You didn't talk to anybody, acknowledge where you were working, because it was state of the art, top secret.
And it's all passed
It's
now.
gone.
But the time I got out of research, our competitors were involved in the business as well as Goodyear, and it was a thing of the past.
And you retired when?
I retired in, well, I was supposed to retire in January of 1960, but they stayed on. They pleaded for me to stay on, I guess, till July of
60.
Of
No,
60.
Not 60.
No, 90.
90.
No, I'm sorry, of
2000.
90.
Yeah. Yeah, 1960, you had been there only 3 years, or 1 year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 1990.
1990.
You've been retired then for approximately 25.
Right.
What, 20?
Seems like
Pardon me.
yesterday.
Like
but,
yesterday. And Francis, I guess curiously, what was Scotland like when you were a young girl? And if you don't mind telling us when you were a young girl, we would love to hear it.
Well, what was it like? I'm sure it was a lot like Wadsworth, just, you know, it was a larger town. Dundee was a larger town. And
But it was post-war, post-World War II.
it was post-World War II, so, you know, goods, luxury goods were, well, that was just unheard of. Rationing was still in effect until 1953, so we were very aware of rationing, even as kids. The candy ration was, you got 2 ounces of candy a week. Well, it wasn't candy, it was sweets. 2 ounces of sweets a week. And that had to do you, but you were well aware that, you know, eggs, clothing, soap, everything was, you know, was hard to come by.
We had the same kind of rationing, but it stopped in
Right.
1945.
Right. Now it stopped in 53. In 1953, my mother said, oh, they're taking candy off of rationing.
Really?
And she gave me 12 cents, which was a shilling. And she said, you go to the store and you can go buy what you can for this 12, which was a lot of money to me. But the line was long at the candy store too, at the sweet shop. So, you know, we came off rationing.
Well, now, did you see any part of the war?
Not really. My mother says she took us up to see a bomb which fell in the local park, but I don't remember going. The only sign of the war in town was in our backyard. Everyone's backyard had a bomb shelter that you could go into. We just played in it later, you know, when I was young. But that was...
Now, when you say that Dundee was a larger city.
Yes, about 2/3 the size of Akron.
2/3 the size of Akron, and
Yes.
Akron right now is about 250,000, something like that. So let's say a couple hundred thousand people.
Couple of hundred thousand people, yes.
Now, as a result of that, it was one of the targets for bombing.
Right, right.
So you probably, had you been older, a little bit older.
I might have been more aware.
Were you born when the war started?
I was born in 1942.
42. So you were not well, right in the middle of the war, actually.
Right, but Dundee had shipping, so that was always a target. If you have shipping.
Yes, we can remember the news stories about Dundee. We call it Dundee. I don't know. Do you call it Dundee?
Yes.
Dundee being bombed, and of course you were probably there. You didn't realize because you were just
realize it. No, my
2
mother.
years old.
Right.
What other kinds of things do you remember about Scotland, particularly, that you say that you were happy to come to the United States? But what kinds of things did you leave there that you still think of?
I'll interrupt her family.
Well, your
Well,
family.
the family.
The whole
Family's here.
family was there.
I'm going back over in the end of June this year. My mother turns 100, so.
Oh, well, God bless
she
her.
has-
It's wonderful.
She has survived wars and everything else. But Scotland, the cities were very much industrial inside the city. But once you got out of town, it's really quite picturesque. You know, it's very green. The weather's a lot cooler. It's a temperate climate. It doesn't get as hot as it gets here. It doesn't get as cold as it gets here. So you don't, you know, it's not as many sunny days, although people here complain about that. But
Right. Well, one of the
Scotland
things that surprised me about Scotland, and I don't know why it would have surprised me, because, you know, logically, it's so far north that at 11 o'clock at night it's still daylight in the summertime.
in the summertime, and in the wintertime it's dark. And the only thing that keeps Scotland warm, relatively speaking, is because they're on the same latitude as Labrador, is the Gulf Stream.
Gulf Stream, right.
Otherwise, you know, they'd be freezing.
Freezing altogether. Now, what time does it get dark in the wintertime?
In the wintertime, by 4 o'clock, it's dark.
It's completely dark by
Yes.
4 o'clock.
Dark by 4.
We walked home. We had to go there for the university, and we walked home at 10:30 at night. Sun was out.
Right, right. When we, people go out and play golf much later at night, or, you know, any kind of activity in the summertime.
And what about starting in the morning, however? It doesn't get nearly so light.
Well, in the summertime it's light early, but in the wintertime, yes, just a very short day in the wintertime.
So you probably
it's
have
dark
about
in the
4 or 5
mornings.
hours of daylight in the
Right,
wintertime.
right.
That's about it. Yeah.
Right.
But during the summer, it starts getting dark about 11:30 at night, and by 3 o'clock in the morning, sun is up and
Already?
Right.
Ready
It
to-
never really gets dark in the
Right.
summertime. You know, it's that kind of, you know, gloaming, as they call it.
The what?
The gloaming.
The gloaming.
The gloaming.
Yeah, the gloaming, right.
Yes, in the gloaming.
Now, getting back to John and your ancestors, that makes you sound as if you're an old man. You're not. But your predecessors here in town, the Nulls, you said that they owned a jewelry store. Tell us a little bit about the jewelry that they had. When we talk about jewelry stores now, we're thinking about the diamond rings and pendants and things like that. What kinds of things were in this jewelry store that might be different from what people would expect 50 years from now?
pretty much what you'd find today. Watches, clocks, especially clocks, because that was a popular thing to have in the home. Crystal, china, pretty much what you'd find today. However, the Knopf brothers didn't carry the exclusive line. they carried the working man's line.
Right, and a lot of pocket watches.
Oh,
I remember-
everybody had
yeah,
a
I remember the pocket watches that they had there. And they were lovely people. I mean, just very down-to-earth people. Tell us about their stature.
Well, when you say they were lovely, I'm going to take your word for it.
They were lovely to customers.
They were lovely to customers, but they were also very short. When we bought the house on Highland Avenue, 142, of course the woodwork was all built in, and in the kitchen they had cupboards that went all the way to the ceiling, but when you stood at the kitchen sink, it was very low. It didn't come, you know, came to the top of my legs, and I'm not a tall person. But they had built it to suit they were in the 4'10" range.
Right, they're very, very small people.
Very short
and
people.
Slight, very slight.
Pennsylvania Dutchmen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, they were Pennsylvania Dutch, right.
Right.
And we have only a couple of seconds left here. Tell us about one of the ancestors who was famous in Wadsworth, Lulu Nolf.
Oh.
Lulu Nolf was my grandfather's cousin, and she grew up in Wadsworth, spent her whole life here, and became a school teacher. And she was a well-known school teacher as a disciplinarian.
She was absolutely, yes, I'll stop that. She was a disciplinarian.
Yeah, her expertise was scaring children.
And she did a beautiful job of scaring generations of children, and those children still remember her today. And if anybody else in year 2064 needs to have one of these scary teachers, all they have to do is to resurrect Lulu Nolf, and she will still scare them even from the grave. Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's important to note, Lulu Nolf lived in the oldest house in the township. It was built in 1834, and it's still standing on Akron Road, on the south side, just north of Hartman.
No, west of Hartman.
East
of Hartman.
East of Hartman.
East of Hartman.
Yes, east of Hartman.
We have come to the end of the hour. Excuse me. We want to thank you not only for a delightful opportunity to present historical data to 2064, but also to present yourselves, who are equally as delightful to a generation that is not yet here, but will always remember what you did for the 250th anniversary. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.